Today I'm going to be looking at Kao The Kangaroo on Nintendo Switch. Is this the best version of the game that you should get, or should you buy it on another console like PlayStation or Xbox? Well, I took the liberty of buying both versions and doing an in-depth comparison on the Switch or PlayStation 5. If you want to hear my full review on the game in general, I recommend checking out my latest video. I played the PS5 version first just so that I knew the best it could look and then could compare it to that. As soon as I booted up the Switch version, I was like, oh man, this isn't good. With a noticeable resolution downgrade to the cheap textures on the grass, I wasn't expecting too much, but this game does feel at home on the Switch. It's a kid-friendly game with a large linear 3D platforming stages, just like some other franchises, that are perfect on Switch, like Super Mario Odyssey and Kirby and the Forgotten Land. The resolution in this game is running at 720p docked and 40p at a somewhat locked 30 frames per second. This game looks pretty decent for a Switch port, but is blurry looking compared to the PS5. I can see the pixels, but honestly, I expect that from a third-party Switch game like this. This game is also built with Unreal Engine 4, which has had some ups and downs on the Switch. Anyways, taking a side-by-side look from the PlayStation to the Switch version, you'll see a lack of shading and weaker colors. And then there's also textures and shadows. The shadows are clearly outlined on the PlayStation, whereas the Switch version might as well ditch the shadows completely because they're barely noticeable. The shadows on the Switch are blurry and over-pixelated, and the shadows blend in underneath Kao. And I had this shadow problem I found it made a little harder knowing where to land on the ground, since it's beneath Kao. Whereas in like Crash, there's a little circle underneath just so that you know where you're landing. This you just have to rely on the shadow, but the shadow's barely there. And the textures. I don't ever expect the Switch to be killing it in the texture game, but you can tell why here. Just look at the wood and water comparing the Switch to the PlayStation. There's also a noticeable amount of pop-in. Even just as you walk around, there are textures and other effects loading in. It's especially apparent when you're loading into a new area or part of the level. You get bombed with every asset trying to load in. And it definitely doesn't help with the frame rate. But if you're in an area with all these assets loaded, it seemed to be running a little smoother. Let's not forget about frame cutting either. You can see it here, but I think that's okay considering the PS5 version does this as well. Now the controls. The controls feel good on this game, especially with the Pro controller. The Joy-Cons are a little different. It can feel a little stiff, especially since there's smaller analog sticks. I also couldn't really find a balance between how slow and fast the camera moved. It either felt too fast or too slow, but I settled on the faster version just so that I could look around easier. And you just gotta get used to it, especially if you're using the Joy-Cons. The load times in this game are actually pretty good, especially comparing it to the PS5. And when you die, it's almost an instantaneous respawn. Now I think a major problem with the Switch version of this game is the frame rate. Most of the time the frame rate should be locked at 30 frames per second, but very frequently it dips lower, especially if you're breaking things and getting coins sucked into you. But still sometimes when you're just jumping around, it starts chugging. This doesn't make or break the game, it's completely playable. It may just disrupt your game a bit, and it's unfortunate for a 3D platformer such as this, but it's playable. After playing this game for a few hours and instantly jumping onto the Switch, I noticed that there's just a tad bit of latency. But it's probably not something I would notice if I didn't go back to back on another console. Or maybe it's just an illusion because the frame rate is cut in half. The sound in this version is also pretty identical to the PS5 version. The music sounds great and it fits perfectly with this game, but I do think that it's a little loud during the cutscenes. Now, the main reason you would want this version of the game is handheld mode. That's the whole point of the Switch, taking it around and playing it wherever you want. And it's my preferred way to play a game. Handheld works as you'd expect. The resolution and textures downgrade even further, but I did find the frame rate was slightly more stable for some reason. I did still have some frame rate dips, and it wasn't perfect, but it was more stable. This game is still perfectly playable in handheld mode. Everything you need is there, but is it worth it for the handheld experience? Yeah, I actually think it is. I think the only reason you should get it on the Switch is if you don't have access to any other consoles, or if you're really set on playing handheld mode. One thing about this game on Switch that really sucks is that there's no physical release here where I live, or anywhere in North America. So I guess my Switch collection will have to just wait a little bit longer. I did buy a physical copy online from Limited Run Games, but I have no idea when it's gonna be here. Good thing digital copies exist. Like I said in my review for this game, there are some great things about this title, like the fantastic level design and the callbacks to the previous games in the franchise, but there's also some not so great things, like the weak voice acting and pop culture references. And there's also a save issue with the Switch version of this game when you access the second hub world. I haven't experienced it myself, but it is something that you might want to look for. And for reference, it's in version 1.1. Hopefully they add a patch sooner than later. But in my opinion, the Switch version, the pros completely outweigh the cons because it's such a great game. I'm definitely going to continue my journey on the PS5 first. If you have a PlayStation 5, then I highly recommend getting on the PlayStation 5. I don't think that the Switch version is the best version of this game, but I do think it's worth it on the Switch if you do decide to buy it on the Switch, especially for the cheap price of this game. If you want to see more reviews, click here. If you want to see more things that may be best on Switch, click this playlist right here. And to subscribe, click here. Make sure you do like and subscribe, share with your friends and family. I will see you in the next one. See you later.